Charles Fraser. The Lost Bet. The Adventures of the Elderly Sherlock Holmes. Episode 12. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go Audio production. Marjorie Smyth sat breathing heavily and slightly sweaty in her bed, holding a book in her hand. Her heart was pounding in her throat when suddenly loud shouting made her flinch. She pushed aside the duvet, jumped out of bed, and her bare feet slapped against the bare floor. She carelessly left her slippers in the corner, rushed to the door, and flung it open with vigour. Geoffrey, her servant, came running towards her excitedly. "Mrs Smyth, did you hear the shot?" Marjorie gasped for air and managed an agitated, "Of course. Where is Jeremy?" Geoffrey flailed his arms helplessly. "His door is locked. I believe the shot came from his room." Pale as chalk, Marjorie stood still for a brief moment, then sprinted off, pulling Geoffrey behind her. Without hesitation, when she reached her husband's bedroom door, she firmly grasped the door handle with both hands and pressed her slight frame against the locked door with all her might. "Let me try," Geoffrey shouted, forgetting his good upbringing, and roughly pushed his employer aside. He took a few metres run up and hurled his voluminous, powerfully built body against the door. There was a crash. The door gave way, swinging fully open and revealing Jeremy's bed. Marjorie and Geoffrey both stood motionless. Then a heart-rending, piercing scream was heard. It was Marjorie before she collapsed unconsciously. "Inspector Lestrade, what brings you to Baker Street at such an early hour?" Holmes greeted the retired inspector whilst dabbing the corners of his mouth with a napkin. Meanwhile, I hastily swallowed the last bite of my breakfast, glanced around briefly in vain for another napkin, only to furtively wipe my hands clean on my trousers before extending my hand to greet Inspector Lestrade. "Good morning, Inspector. Lovely to see you," I said somewhat sheepishly. "Thank you, Dr. Watson," he replied. "Likewise." Holmes, on the other hand, seemed to find our exchange of pleasantries had gone on too long, for before I could say anything further to Inspector Lestrade, he interrupted. "Inspector, how might we be of assistance?" Lestrade gave me an amused smile. Then his face suddenly took on a serious professional expression, and he turned to Holmes. "There was a death last evening. Jeremy Smyth, of Smyth Industry, was found dead in his bed." "I have just read about it," said Holmes, reaching for the newspaper that still lay on our breakfast table. "Suicide, according to the Telegraph's headline." Lestrade nodded distractedly. Geoffrey Spencer, a domestic servant of the Smyths and a long-standing acquaintance of mine, called on me in the dead of night. He harbours certain doubts about his master's suicide. "And now we come into play," Holmes concluded. "Have you already spoken with the lead investigator?" Lestrade nodded again. "Inspector Wolford is leading the investigation. According to him, there is no suspicion of third-party involvement." "And what makes this Geoffrey doubt it?" I asked. Jeremy Smyth ordered lunch for the following day from Geoffrey just 2 hours before the shot was fired. Generally, he appeared rather cheerful to him, so nothing that would suggest that Mr Smyth was about to take his own life. Holmes uttered. "If you wish to examine the crime scene yourself," Lestrade continued, "I asked Inspector Wolford at the start of his shift to leave everything at the scene untouched." "What do you think, Holmes? Shall we head off straight away?" I asked, and I did not have to ask my friend for long. When we arrived at the Smyth family estate, Inspector Wolford had already completed his on-site investigation. Only one police officer waited in front of the house for our arrival, greeted us cordially, and immediately led us through the empty drawing room upstairs to Jeremy Smyth's room, which was protected from unauthorised entry by yellow police tape and another posted officer. We noted the broken door, ducked under the police tape, and looked around the room. Mr Smyth's body lay in bed, completely covered by a white sheet. Holmes turned to Inspector Walford's subordinate and asked, "What can you tell me about the sequence of events, and who is responsible for the broken door?" The two young officers appeared somewhat intimidated by the presence of the great Sherlock Holmes, but finally the smaller of the two spoke. "At 15 minutes to 11 in the evening, the butler, Geoffrey Spencer, heard a shot. At that time, there were 3 people in the house: Jeremy Smyth in this room, his wife Marjorie Smyth in her room at the end of the corridor, and the butler himself downstairs in the kitchen. He rushed upstairs immediately and knocked on his master's door. When he did not respond to this or to loud calls, he tried to enter but found the door locked. He then ran down the corridor and called for Mrs Smyth. Marjorie Smyth was already running towards him. Together, they ran back to Jeremy Smyth's room. Mrs Smyth also tried unsuccessfully to open the door to Jeremy's room, whereupon Geoffrey, the butler, threw himself against the door and successfully broke it down. The young police officer briefly paused his account, and a grin spread across his face, as if he were mighty proud of having recounted everything completely and accurately. Holmes twitched his eyebrow in amusement and said, "What happened next?" Mrs Smyth and Mr saw that Jeremy Smyth was lying dead in his bed, whereupon Mrs Smyth let out a scream and then fainted. Inspector Walford was immediately notified, and we arrived here. Holmes patted the young police officer briefly on the shoulder in recognition. Then he strode towards the bed and removed piece by piece the sheet that functionally covered the dead man. A large bullet hole adorned the right side of his head, whilst his right hand, which lay right next to his head, still firmly gripped the revolver. A grotesque sight to which I would never become accustomed. Holmes examined Jeremy Smyth from head to toe before covering the lifeless body with the sheet once more. Then his gaze fell upon the bedside table. He briefly picked up the newspaper which lay open upon it, giving the impression it had only been set aside momentarily. Then Holmes reached for the cup of tea, still half full, which stood beside the newspaper. He smelled it thoroughly, then brought the cup to his lips and took a small sip. Then he returned the cup to its original position. Holmes stood up straight, cleared his throat and said, "Gentlemen, we are indeed dealing with a murder here." "But Holmes," I said, bewildered, "what makes you think that? The door was locked from the inside. Look, the key is still in the lock. What on earth, apart from suicide, could possibly be the explanation here?" I was certain that this time my friend had gone astray, but he replied, "Watson, do pick up the teacup and tell me what you make of it." I did as instructed, took the teacup in my hand and smelled it as well. Even without taking a sip, I was certain of its contents. The tea was laced with opium poppy. "So what?" I said. "Watson, tell me, would you take a sleeping draught if you were planning to take your own life?" asked Holmes. I hesitated briefly, but Holmes was right as always. "No, I most certainly would not." "And do you believe," he continued, "that before firing the fatal shot, you would read the jokes in the daily newspaper?" With that, he reached for the newspaper again and held it under my nose. I shook my head. What my friend explained sounded more than plausible. "Nevertheless, we cannot ignore the fact that the bedroom door was locked from the inside. We are at least 3 meters up on the first floor," I pointed out. "I'm eager to hear this explanation. Holmes, it's impossible," said Inspector Lestrade incredulously. "Walford was right. It was suicide." "No, it most certainly was not," declared Holmes combatively, "and I shall prove it to you." "The bet is on," said Inspector Lestrade, extending his hand towards Holmes to seal the wager. Holmes cast a quick glance at his watch and accepted the wager. "Tomorrow at the same time, 12 o'clock noon, I shall deliver you a perpetrator. Watson, would you be so kind as to fetch the butler, Geoffrey Spencer, and escort him to the drawing room? We must not waste any more time. I shall quickly settle the arrangements with Inspector Lestrade here." Willingly, I left the two opponents alone and set off to look for Geoffrey Spencer. The drawing room was empty, so I continued along the corridor until I could hear quiet voices. I followed the voices and eventually reached the kitchen. A man and a woman were sitting at a small wooden table, talking. When they noticed my presence, both fell silent instantly. "I beg your pardon for the interruption," I said. "My name is Dr. Watson. I am Sherlock Holmes's partner. We are here with Inspector Lestrade and would like to have a word with Mr. Spencer." "Good day. It's lovely to have you here. I am Geoffrey Spencer," he introduced himself. "If you would kindly follow me to the drawing room, Mr. Holmes will join us momentarily." Silently, we walked together into the drawing room and sat down opposite each other. We did not have to wait long before Holmes appeared. "Where is Inspector Lestrade?" I asked. "Lestrade has left everything else to us and sends his regards, mister," replied Holmes. Geoffrey Spencer uttered only a quiet "thank you" and looked dejectedly at the floor. "Mister," Holmes continued, "Inspector Lestrade has already told me about your suspicion that Mr. Smyth's death might have been caused by foul play, and also why you came to this conclusion. What else can you tell me about Mr. Smyth?" Geoffrey Spencer swallowed hard. "But he stammered. "I understand your reservations about gossiping about your employer all too well, but the man is dead, and everything you tell me could lead to the apprehension of the perpetrator," explained Holmes. Mr. pulled a handkerchief from his jacket pocket and wiped his forehead before beginning to speak. "Mr. Smyth was always fair and just towards me. I have been in his service for many years. Mr. Smyth was a successful businessman. Sadly, in recent years, he became increasingly consumed by his hobby." "And what would that be?" I asked. "Horse racing. Mr. Smyth maintains his own stables, which includes several valuable racehorses." "There's nothing wrong with that." I made my opinion known. "Why, the man with the missing pigeon?" "What do you mean by that? He gambled away a great deal of money," Holmes deduced. "He gambled away vast sums of money, accumulated debts, grew increasingly distant from his wife, pawned some of her valuable jewellery, began drinking, and whilst intoxicated, started an affair with the cook." "Did Mrs. Smyth know about all of this?" asked Holmes. "Yes, but regarding the affair with our cook, I'm not quite certain. I don't think so. You see, about a fortnight ago, I overheard Clara, the cook, attempting to blackmail Mr. Smyth. She demanded money from him, threatening to reveal everything to his wife. Mr. Smyth merely laughed at her and told her she should go ahead. The Smyths' marriage must have been under a rather unfortunate star, I surmised. Geoffrey Spencer merely shrugged his shoulders, but said nothing more. He was visibly uncomfortable revealing anything further. "Thank you, mister. You have been most helpful. Just one more thing. Where might we find the aforementioned cook and Mrs. Smyth?" "Could you tell me which number Dave lives at?" Holmes inquired of the little old lady. "Would you mind if we had a look around Mrs. Smyth's room after speaking with Clara?" asked Holmes. Geoffrey Spencer raised his hands defensively. "I know nothing, and I have not permitted anything, but you know where her bedchamber is located. If you need me, I shall be in the garden tending to the roses." Thus he stood up and left Holmes and me behind. "Come along, Holmes," I said. "I know where the kitchen and thus the cook can be found." "Well then, Watson," said Holmes, "let's get going after all. I still have a wager to win." As instructed, we found Clara in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. I estimated Clara to be in her mid-30s. She was of well-proportioned tall stature and had finely chiselled features. Her blonde hair was tied in a knot at the nape of her neck. One could say with certainty that this Clara was a very beautiful, appealing woman. When she noticed Holmes and me, she instantly dropped her knife and gave us an ice-cold stare. "What do you want?" she asked unfriendly. "Good day, madam," said Holmes, not allowing himself to be intimidated in the slightest. We merely wish to have you confirm that you had an affair with Mr Smyth and ultimately even resorted to blackmailing him." Clara glared angrily. "Where did you get this nonsense from? Geoffrey, isn't it? That old chap is making things up and spreading lies, nothing more." "I believe you are the one who is lying here," countered Holmes. "Oh, believe whatever you want," Clara replied dismissively. "So that means you had no motive to kill Mr Smyth?" Holmes pressed. Clara laughed mockingly. "If anyone killed Smyth, it was his wife, certainly not me. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment with my vegetables. One more thing, do you know when Mrs Smyth is returning?" "Usually, Madam returns around 7 o'clock in the evening for dinner," Clara replied dismissively. "Thank you," said Holmes, and we left the ice-cold angel alone with her vegetables. "Let us take a quick look in Marjorie Smith's bedroom," said Holmes, already making his way upstairs. "Holmes, do you think this is right? We cannot simply enter Marjorie's private room without having obtained permission beforehand." I expressed my doubts. "Come now, Watson. Since when have you become such a moral crusader? After all, I have a wager to win." I paused and stood still. "What is it about this wager? Has Inspector Lestrade wounded your ego, or why must you absolutely prove to him that you are right?" "Simply because I am right," replied Holmes. "Have you not noticed that Lestrade is behaving rather peculiarly?" "Peculiar?" I asked. "What do you mean by that?" "Well, he is behaving rather differently than usual. He has acquired rather feminine traits. Have you noticed how he constantly gesticulates with his hands while speaking, extending his little finger? Moreover, he purses his lips when talking. I tell you, Watson, something is not quite right with our good inspector." "Holmes, whatever is the matter with you? I cannot confirm any such thing. The inspector is behaving exactly as he always does. The only one acting suspiciously is you," I declared. "You simply do not possess my powers of observation, Watson. I am quite certain our good Lestrade will soon appear before us wearing a tutu." "You mean one of those little skirts that ladies wear at the ballet? Holmes, with all due respect, but you are vastly overestimating yourself. If Inspector Lestrade ever shows up wearing a tutu, I shall personally put it on and run through London wearing it. I swear to you." I could only shake my head at Holmes's self-satisfied manner. Nevertheless, I followed him up the stairs to Marjorie Smith's room. While Holmes entered busily and scrutinised every corner with his gaze, I remained standing in the doorframe, lost in thought. Murder or suicide? Holmes's objections could not be easily dismissed, yet it remained a fact that the door was locked from the inside. Who but Jeremy Smyth himself could have done this? And if it was indeed murder, who was the perpetrator? The cook Clara, who had an affair with her master and ultimately blackmailed him? Or perhaps the wife, as the cook believed? I could not yet form my own picture of Marjorie Smyth. On one hand, I knew that she had fainted at the sight of her dead husband. On the other hand, Geoffrey Spencer had told us that Mr Smyth had pawned some of her jewellery to pay his gambling debts. Additionally, he had been unfaithful to her. Whether she knew about this was still unclear. It was high time we spoke with Marjorie Smyth personally and not just examined her room. Speaking of which, Holmes stood before me and seemed to be waiting for me to finish my thoughts. "Shall we, old chap?" he asked. "Have you found anything?" I asked instead. "Well, that depends," he answered evasively. We were just about to leave the estate when a well-dressed gentleman approached us and stopped in front of us. "Good day. Might you tell me if Mr Smyth is available here?" Holmes and I exchanged a quick glance, then I answered, "That depends. Mr Smyth departed from us yesterday evening." "You mean he is dead?" asked the stranger in disbelief. "Precisely," said Holmes. "May I inquire as to the nature of your business with Mr Smyth? We are investigating the case." "You are investigating? He was murdered," he stammered. We did not say that, I hastened to reply so as not to spread false rumours. So, Holmes pressed on, why did you wish to speak with Mr Smyth? The man seemed to slowly regain his composure, then said, We had arranged to meet at the racecourse today, but Jeremy did not appear. Now I know why. In any case, I wanted to inquire once more about why he no longer wished to sell me the mare. After all, we had sealed the sale with a handshake. You must understand, in horse trading, a handshake is as binding as a signed contract. When push comes to shove, rather not, I thought to myself, but kept my comment to myself. And what made you think that Mr Smyth no longer wished to sell? Asked Holmes. Well, his wife came to see me early yesterday and informed me that the sale was off. She did not give me any reasons for this. He shrugged his shoulders unknowingly. Well, I cannot answer that question either, but thank you for sharing it with us. Good day. Holmes bid farewell, and we left this man behind, bewildered. I loved the scent of horses. I inhaled it deeply with pleasure. Only now did I begin to look around. The estate surrounding the riding stables was enormous, very well maintained, and included vast pastures where many horses were already frolicking. Naturally, there had to be a private racing track for training. Right next to it was one of those modern horse walkers, which could accommodate up to 6 horses at once, for warming them up or cooling them down after work, or simply to provide them with general exercise. A horse walker was indeed a splendid invention. Suddenly, a jockey crossed our path, leading his horse by the reins. Excuse me, could you tell us where we might find Marjorie Smyth? I stopped the man. Of course. You'll surely find Marjorie with her mare. The stable building is just here on the right, left wing, last stall, the jockey informed us kindly. Thank you very much, I replied, and Holmes and I immediately made our way there. The jockey had been right. Marjorie Smyth sat in her horse's stall with her legs drawn up in the straw. Her mare peacefully ate hay beside her whilst Marjorie lovingly stroked her head. Marjorie Smyth was a delicate little person. Her brunette hair was tied back in a plait, with loose strands falling across her face. Only now did she seem to notice us. She rose to her full height, which surely measured no more than 5 feet 3 inches. What can I do for you? She asked in a firm voice. Good day, Mrs Smyth. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this here is my partner, Dr. Watson. We are investigating the murder of your late husband. But first, please let me express my deepest condolences. Murder case? She asked, surprised. He took his own life. I'm not convinced of that, Mrs Smyth, countered Holmes. Yeah, but who would do such a terrible thing, and above all, how? The door was locked after all, she asked, visibly confused. That is our job to find out, I chimed in. A splendid creature you have there, Mrs Smyth, Holmes remarked appreciatively. But you don't know anything about horses at all, I said, bewildered. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. It is large, dark brown, has 4 legs and a head, and I am quite certain it smells somewhat more pleasant than the others. Marjorie Smyth had to smile. A true connoisseur, I see. Why did you prevent the sale of your mare yesterday? I presume we are talking about this animal here? Asked Holmes. Of course I remember. At first, I thought they were typical symptoms of an allergy, but then I realised it couldn't possibly have been the pigeons. No man could sleep a night after night with such physical reactions next to an allergen source. Therefore, I have no idea what ultimately triggered this sudden cold, and whether it was actually an allergy. I gather your marriage wasn't going particularly well, I concluded. Oh yes, indeed, she interrupted me almost immediately. I shall merely point out the separate bedrooms. Holmes picked up the thread. The separate bedrooms were purely of a pragmatic nature. My husband used to go to bed early and rise again in the early morning. I, on the other hand, am rather a night owl. Did your husband know that you had cancelled the sale of your horse? Asked Holmes. No, he did not know yet. I had not managed to tell him, she said convincingly. Yet something in her eyes made me doubt her words. Holmes seemed to feel the same way. How would he have reacted if he had found out about it? He probed. I would have given him additional pieces from my jewellery collection. It would not have been a significant problem. Now, if you gentlemen would excuse me, Winnie and I would like to stretch our legs a bit. With these words, she took hold of the horse's halter, led it out of the stall and past us. Winnie was truly a magnificent creature. Phew, the conversation thus appears to be concluded, Holmes noted ironically. I could only agree. What happens next? I asked my friend. Let us first return home. Do you believe you still have a chance to win your bet against Inspector Lestrade? Time is slipping away from us, I remarked. Oh, I shall win, rest assured of that. The mischief rang out in his voice. I have something of an idea. Of course, I did not even need to ask what brilliant idea he had in mind. Holmes would only reveal more about it when he deemed it appropriate. Having arrived home at Baker Street, I removed my coat and made straight for my favourite armchair. Holmes remained fully dressed, standing in the doorway, deep in thought. Won't you join me, old friend? I invited him. At that very moment, Alice appeared and asked, Where have you both been for so long? I was slowly beginning to worry about you. What has Inspector Lestrade dragged you into this time? Do you believe the lady capable of such cunning thought processes? I waited for 1.5 hours before Holmes appeared at home again. By then, it was 7:30 in the evening. Where is Alice? I asked him eagerly. To be honest, I don't know that yet either, Holmes admitted through gritted teeth. Where have you been? Were you and Alice able to discover anything? I asked curiously. Yes, we did. Good night, Watson, was all he said before disappearing into his room. A new day, and thus a new morning broke. It was already 9 o'clock in the morning. I had been sitting at the breakfast table for a good 2 hours waiting for Holmes. Actually, I thought our day would begin earlier today. After all, he wanted to win his bet against Lestrade at all costs, which stated that he had to present his perpetrator by 12 o'clock noon. But so far, there was no trace of Holmes. I even peered into his bedroom just to make sure he hadn't already left without me. However, I heard his regular snoring as soon as I opened the door, just a tiny crack. So I continued waiting. The clock struck 10, then 10:30. Only then did Holmes emerge from his chamber. In the best of moods, he sat down at the table with me and began to enjoy his breakfast. A very good morning to you, Watson, he purred. A good morning to you too, but may I briefly disturb your peace of mind and remind you of your appointment at 12 o'clock noon with Inspector Lestrade? I asked him in a slightly harried tone. Oh, we won't make that one any more. As you always say, Watson, there's nothing quite like a proper breakfast. And with that, he reached for his second bread roll. Let someone understand this man. As for me, I've given up. Nonetheless, after he had studied his morning newspaper in great detail, he slowly began to get going. Shall we depart? He asked me with a calmness that drove me nearly mad. As far as I'm concerned, we could have been on our way for more than 4 hours now, I noted, dumbfounded. Are you aware that we cannot keep our 12 o'clock appointment with Lestrade? Holmes merely shrugged his shoulders briefly. You are probably right about that, but I am certain Inspector Lestrade will wait for us, even though I have lost the bet. Do you even know who the perpetrator is? I asked, by now rather irritably. But of course, what else do you think? Yeah, but if you already know who the perpetrator is, why then did you not make an effort to be punctual? I asked Holmes, utterly perplexed. As so often, he remained silent, owing me an answer. Oh, do you know what? I said grumpily, making a dismissive gesture. At 20 minutes past 12, we had finally made it to the Smyths' estate. Inspector Lestrade was sitting waiting for us on the steps leading up to the entrance. Holmes, you have lost, Lestrade called out to us before we even reached him. "It is also lovely to see you, Inspector," said Holmes amicably. "But I must admit, it shows true greatness that you still show up here, even though you cannot deliver a culprit to me this time. I wouldn't have waited much longer for you two," Lestrade chirped. "But who says I don't know who the perpetrator is?" Holmes countered. "You were able to solve the case?" asked Lestrade, astonished. "Thanks to our dear Alice, I was able to," Holmes replied. "What has Mrs. Miller got to do with it?" asked Inspector Lestrade, confused. "Alice helped me prove yesterday evening that it is possible to leave Jeremy Smith's room via the trellis on the exterior facade. Admittedly, this can only be accomplished by an extremely petite woman, and Alice only managed to achieve the time I had specified on her 4th attempt. However, it is possible." "Who is it?" I asked excitedly. "Was it the mistress or the wife?" "It was Marjorie Smyth, Watson. Though the cook is also slender, the trellis would not support her given her stature and height. Therefore, Mrs. Smyth is the only possible suspect. Moreover, I found a small bottle of opium poppies in her room. She wanted to ensure her husband was in a deep sleep when she delivered the fatal shot. Furthermore, she cancelled the sale of her horse that same day, and I am certain this led to an argument with her husband that very evening. Additionally, she arranged for Geoffrey Spencer to be in the kitchen at the time of the crime, preparing her tea. Had he been in his usual place at that hour, his chamber opposite Jeremy Smith's room, she could never have returned to her own room unnoticed. Then there was her heavy breathing and the perspiration on her forehead that Mr. noticed immediately after the deed. You need only have observed Alice yesterday to know that I am right. Evidence upon evidence. I am absolutely certain any court will find her guilty of murder." "But Geoffrey Spencer said that Marjorie Smyth fainted at the sight of her dead husband. She truly has remarkable acting talent, I would say to that." "I would never have thought her capable of it, but you have completely convinced me, Mr. Holmes," said Inspector Lestrade. "Nevertheless, you have lost your wager," he said triumphantly, reaching for his linen bag, which I had only just noticed. And I could hardly believe my eyes when I saw what Inspector Lestrade brought to light. It was a pink lace fluffy something, known in professional circles as a tutu. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Holmes, who could barely keep control of his facial expressions. Wordlessly, he took the tutu from Inspector Lestrade and passed it on to me. "I look forward to your run through London, old friend." You were listening to Charles Fraser. The Lost Bet. The Adventures of the Elderly Sherlock Holmes. Episode 12. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go Audio production.